everyone, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo. I have been working on this project for a very long time, and I'm very excited to bring it to you. In honor of Strange World releasing on November 23rd, I decided to go back and watch every single animated film in the Walt Disney Animated Studios animated canon. Now, if anyone doesn't know what those are the 60 films produced by Walt Disney Animation Studios. There are so many little subsections within the entire Disney company brand. You have your Marvel, your Star Wars, Pixar, and you have other animation branches as well, including Disney Animated TV. That's kind of where all the straight-to-video sequels go, stuff like a Goofy movie. There are so many little subsections of Disney that I won't be talking about in this series of videos, but this series is focused on those 60 films produced by Walt Disney Studios Animation as part of their canon. This is what the studio deems to be the Disney classics. Yes, even the new ones. They are under this whole umbrella of Disney classics. And amongst that whole library of 60 films, there are 7 eras that I'm going to be going through week by week in lead up to Strange World, which is going to be Disney's 61st feature in their animated canon. We're going to be starting off with the Golden Age, which takes place from the late 30s, of course, to the beginning of the war in the 40s, and then we are transitioning into the wartime era, which is the period of time where they were making package films during the war because of low budget costs. Then we go into the Silver Age, which starts in 1950 and lasts to the mid-60s when Walt Disney unfortunately passes away. And then we get into the Bronze Age, otherwise known as the Dark Age, which spans from Disney's death all the way to the Disney Renaissance in 1989 with The Little Mermaid. Starting there, we get the whole Disney Renaissance throughout the 90s, and then the post-Renaissance era starting in 2000. Following the post-Renaissance era in 2008, we get into the Revival era, which we're currently still in. We are still in the Revival era, the last film being Encanto, the next film being Strange World, so I figured this was a great time. We have a few weeks until that comes out, so I figured week by week we'd go through every single era of Disney animation and rank them, because I'm so fascinated to see how the studio has evolved over time, and doing this project, working months and months on this project, watching all these movies, researching all the movies in the eras of animation, seeing what the animated styles were for all of them, I've just become so much more fascinated with the evolution of animation as a whole by Disney and in just the craft itself. There's obviously a criticism to be made about Disney as a brand and all the monopolization it has taken on in the past few years. These rankings are going to be specifically devoted to the art itself that is created, but I do think it's valuable to have that conversation about Disney as a company. I really encourage you, maybe in the comments, maybe amongst yourselves, to talk about those things if you feel like you would like to, because I do think that's warranted, even if it's not necessarily going to be brought up in relation to these films that I'm going to be talking about. What I will talk about, though, are some of the controversial elements of some of these films that is directly seen in the contents of the films. I think that's also very important to talk about. Yes, some of these movies came out a long time ago, but I don't think that excuses some of the horrible things seen in some of these movies, so I will be talking about that. But why don't we kick it off with the first era of Disney animation being the Disney classics, aka the Golden Age. This is a collection of just 5 films, but in these 5 films, we see so much great experimentation. We really see Disney start to evolve in what would later become the Disney brand, stuff we'd see in further eras or down the line, stuff we're still seeing today. A lot of its roots, especially in its storytelling and its characterization, starts from the Disney classic era, aka the Golden Age. This is obviously a much different looking era than what we're used to seeing in modern day because everything here is hand-drawn, and as I said earlier, this is very experimental. There's a lot of animation here that does seem dated, but there's also a lot of animation here that is so spectacular because of how old it is, and putting it in the context of that time period, just how revolutionary it is, it blows my mind, and it's something really fun to watch. As a much more mature watcher compared to my childhood when I just watched these movies at face value for its stories and its cute little characters. Now I can kind of dig a little bit deeper into what makes them special beyond its storytelling, beyond its characters, beyond the thrills and in some of these cases chills that these films provide. So let's kick it off, starting with number 5. I have Dumbo. Now, Dumbo is not a film I hate. It's not a film I even dislike that much, but I think compared to these other films, this one stands out the least. I know Dumbo is very much revered by so many other people, and honestly, go for it. I'm glad you like Dumbo. I like Dumbo himself. I like the character. I like all the characters. I think Timothy Mouse is a fun little sidekick. I love their little drug trip, the pink elephants on parade. I think that's a very interesting visual piece of storytelling. I think it's trippy. I think it's weird and kind of scary, and I kind of love that.
what a sight! Chase 'em away, I'm afraid. Need your aid, big elephants on parade.
But I think the story itself is a little bit bare bones. The story follows Dumbo and his mom as they are held in captivity as part of this traveling circus, and then we see this incident happen where they get separated, and you start to see Dumbo kind of come into his own, come of age as an elephant without his mother, with the guidance of Timothy Mouse, his essentially his Jiminy Cricket, if you will, which we'll get to later. But I think the most unsatisfying part about Dumbo is that when we get to the end and when we finally see him as this flying elephant, I mean, it's the flying elephant, that's so cool, and then the movie ends. And I think that's the biggest fault I've always had with Dumbo, is that when it starts to get interesting, it ends. I think the most interesting stuff, aside from Baby Mine, which is an absolute tearjerker, and the pink elephants on parade, which, as I said, is just insanely creepy and completely mesmerizing for all the craziest ways.
What'll I do? What'll I do? What an unusual view!
I think the most interesting stuff is Dumbo learning how to fly and becoming this free spirit, and then it ends, and I just wish this story continued. And that's why I'm glad the Tim Burton remake expanded the story. It became more about his reunion with his mother and what it means now that Dumbo has kind of evolved into this greater elephant, and to see just how mighty Dumbo can be. And I think the movie loses track of that. I think the movie kind of ends at the most interesting spot, and I just wish it kept going. I wish we got more of it. It is very short. I think the animation here is a little less inspired than some of the other films that I'm going to be talking about today. In this golden age, I think Dumbo is probably the least impressive of the five.
Never to part, baby of mine.
Moving on to number 4 is Fantasia. This is a film that a lot of people have a lot of love for, and I totally get that. I think this is obviously such a great experimentation. Like I said, this is a time where Disney was really kind of just figuring out what we could do with animation, and I think Fantasia is probably one of the best examples of that, because this is less of a narrative story. It is more a visual concert. This is a series of musical compositions with animation as a way to elevate this musical storytelling. As a music buff, I really expected to like this a lot more than I did, but I think because it is fragmented into so many different segments and we don't have that overarching narrative, it's a little harder to just jump right into. I think when you have so many different segments, it becomes a little bit episodic, and some segments stand out over other segments, and this is something I will talk about when we get to the package film era, the wartime era. I feel like there's a little bit of a lack of consistency. Music is the thing that is joining all these segments together, but aside from the music, I don't think a lot of these segments have much to do with one another, and yes, they're each their own individual short little thing, but I kind of wish there was just a little bit more coherency, maybe in theme, maybe in some characters, just some sort of crossing over to make it all fit within one cohesive whole, because I just look at Fantasia and I just see a little bit more fragmentation rather than the collective whole. Now, as for the design, as for the animation, as for the music, it's all spectacular, and that's why I do revisit Fantasia. Even if I'm a little underwhelmed by the storytelling, I'm still just completely entranced by the music, and I think that's one strength of Fantasia. It's obviously built upon its music, and I could listen to that music for days and days and days. I think it's gorgeous music. The thing is, I'm such a music fan that I honestly, at the end of the day, would prefer to just watch the musicians play the music than watch this animation that, of course, supports the music. And I know that's not the point of Fantasia. The whole point is that they're blending animation and music to make something amazing, but I think some of the actual animated stories are a little lackluster. I'd honestly just love to watch the trumpeters and the violinists and the cellist and the pianist and the conductor. Like, I like that stuff. I'm a music nerd. I like watching that stuff. So in that respect, I find Fantasia a little underwhelming, but I still think it's great. I think the Sorcerer's Apprentice segment in particular is just so much fun, and I love to see Mickey Mouse kind of get this central big moment. Even though it happens earlier in the film, and I think that's another problem I have with the film, is that that moment happens so early that the segments that follow aren't as good, and therefore it kind of loses a bit of steam as it goes on. But those are little nitpicks. I still think Fantasia is such an important film in the history of cinema itself, because it shows just what animation can express without words, and a lot of that is beautiful. It's just I don't know if I needed that much of it, because it is a longer film than some of these others. So I'm a little mixed on Fantasia than most, but I still really appreciate it. It's a film I appreciate more than I enjoy, but I do appreciate it nonetheless. At number 3, we have Bambi. Bambi is such a sweet little tale that I kind of underrated when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I was like, all right, this is a little boring. It's just these animals in a forest. But when you think about the context of Bambi, it took place so long ago that the animation itself is just so dazzling. That itself is just something to be mesmerized by. And second, I think I was missing some of those really key themes that I may just not have grasped until I got older, about death, about loneliness, about what it means to have friendship and to evolve as a person, or in this case, a deer, and growing up and what that means. And there are a lot of really nuanced themes in here that are not as in your face, and maybe that's why I didn't grasp it when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate so much more. There's definitely a tonal shift between the beginning sweetness of the film and just the animals hanging out in the forest, and then of course the climactic moment, unfortunately, with Bambi's mom, and then of course the ending when Bambi's grown up and all the forest fires and all that. I think it definitely has a big arc, but I think it reaches that arc pretty successfully. I think the story itself builds to a very fitting spot, a very fitting conclusion. I think it has something important to say.
Gee whiz, what happened that time?
This film wasn't even made with a narrative in mind. This was a film made because Walt Disney wanted to see, hey, can we animate animals? Yeah, let's get a few animals in the studio. They brought real deer in, real rabbits, real skunks, and they said, yeah, let's try to animate these. Let's just see them walk around and see if we can kind of draw their motions and see if we can capture the animal movements accurately through animation. And then we get this beautiful film as a result of it. And I kind of love that. The experimentation. This is what I'm talking about. The golden age is just so good at showing just the evolution of cinema in just a few short years and how much Disney grew in just 5 films. This being the 5th film before the wartime era. It's just so amazing to see that these little techniques that were just so revolutionary at the time are just commonplace nowadays. But we wouldn't have these commonplace techniques without the backbones that were established in the golden age. So I just have a lot of respect for Bambi. I know it's a little bit too tranquil at times, it's a little too simple, but I think the simplicity is all very surface level. I think there's a lot under the surface that is very profound and very nuanced, and I have only grown to appreciate more with time.
I'm thumping. That's why they call me Thumper.
At number 2, we have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This is the film that started it all. Some say it's the first full-length animated film. That is not necessarily true because other countries did have full-length feature animated films, but this is the first, as we know it, traditional animated film full-length, and I think that's obviously monumental, no matter what you decide to claim it as.
Well, yeah, that's true.
It's honestly quite baffling that a studio was able to pull this off on the first go, because this isn't just a very charming fairy tale. It doesn't just have great characters, but it has a real darkness to it that when I sat down to rewatch this, I just forgot how present it was.
Look.
And this is something that most studios, when they're first getting their footing, would probably evolve into, you know, kind of making more mature stories, or making stories that range from sweet, child, fanciful fun and the dark, grim natures of these original fairy tales, but they did it on the first go, and that's really, really impressive. This is a classic in all the best ways. The animation itself is very classic. You can tell it is old, it is dated, but there's such a charm in that, because it is the first, essentially. It is the one that kind of started all this beauty that would come later, and we don't get this whole 60 film canon without this film, and I think that's just something in and of itself to appreciate and to value. It's a film I go back to time and time again, and I just really love it.
Why, you little man!
At number 1, though, we have Pinocchio. Pinocchio has been a topic of conversation as of late because of the remake, but I'm not talking about the remake, I'm talking about the original, and the original is just spectacular. Starting with the animation itself, even between Snow White and Pinocchio, the first and second film, the animation itself just has seemingly evolved just in a span of a few years, and it's showing. The animation here is just exceptional, especially in the underwater sequences, just the way they kind of animate all the bubbles and just that atmosphere of being underwater. I mean, that's so impressive given the time period, given that this is the second go. It's impressive to come out the gate swinging really strong, but then it's even more impressive to evolve completely in just one film after that into a whole nother level of brilliance, and I think Pinocchio does that. It doesn't get into any sort of sophomore slump. It just continues the trend of amazing animation, and it's dazzling to look at. It follows Snow White's theme as well of having really dark moments. I really love how Disney really embraced the darker moments earlier on that's almost kind of missing in some of the later classics, which we'll talk about in the next few videos, is that darkness, is the fearlessness to kind of go there with the stories. Because nowadays, I think a lot of animated films get pretty dark, especially in mature themes. I think we see it a lot nowadays. But back then, I mean, this must have been revolutionary. The fact that we were not only putting fairy tales to screen in longer formats, and not only doing it beautifully through animation, but also scaring the living daylights out of us at the same time. And Pinocchio is definitely full of that imagery, definitely full of some real chills and thrills. But like all these Golden Age films, there is also such a warmth and a heart to Pinocchio. I think there's just love woven through every single drawing, every single sketch of the drawing, and also through every line of dialogue. All the performances feel warm and comforting. I mean, you just hear Geppetto's voice, Jiminy's voice, Pinocchio's, like they're all such iconic voice performances. And yes, the voice actors are not household names, especially all these decades later, but you can instantly hear Jiminy Cricket's voice if you just think about it. And that's why I didn't want to bring it up too much, but the remake, it seems like a lot of the time they're just trying to impersonate this original film because it works so well. And you know, it just goes to show how strong this original was. It's a sweet story, it's an enduring story, it's charming, it has ups, it's downs, it has a lot of great villains, it has multiple villains, Monstro, Stromboli, Honest John. It has a lot to say about growing up and identity, what it means to want to be something you're not, and how you strive to become that, not just physically but emotionally, and showing that growth to kind of reach your dreams and your ambitions. And it just evokes a sense of magic and wonder that I love. And there's a reason I think we hear When You Wish Upon a Star every time a Disney movie starts. It's because that kind of encompasses the entire Disney brand, is making dreams realities through animation. And I think that's just what's so spectacular about Disney animation, and what is so spectacular about Pinocchio, that set the groundwork for so many films to follow, including so many iterations of Pinocchio itself.
Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
So many films that try to capture this magic and just can't, because this did so successfully on the first go.
He was, and only Pinocchio.
So that's my ranking for the 5 Golden Age Disney animated films. This is a shorter group of films than some of the later eras, but it was still great to talk about the foundations of this animated studio. In the next video, I will be talking about the wartime era. That was the time period where, I mean, it's in the name, the world was at war, and Walt Disney had to severely cut back on budgeting. He also made some strategic moves in some of the content that was shown in these films in relation to attitudes toward different countries. And all the films I'll be talking about next week are package films. They're all collections of short films that are lumped together. I feel like it's the era that gets talked about the least of all the Disney eras, so I'm very excited to talk about it. It's just a very interesting time of filmmaking, especially coming off of these 5 classics to see where Disney went next. It's just very interesting, and I can't wait to talk about it. What are your favorite Disney Golden Age films, and what eras are you most excited to see me tackle in the next few weeks ahead? This is an ongoing project. I'm hoping to get some feedback on this video as I make my next video. I really want these to evolve and really pay respect to the great animators who brought these stories to life, but also look at them from a modern lens and kind of rediscover what makes them all so amazing, or in some cases not amazing, and what that means also in the grand scheme of things. So thank you guys so much for watching. Leave your comments down below, like this video, subscribe, share with your friends, and I will be back next week to talk about the wartime era. Till then, have a great day. Don't take apples from sketchy strangers. See you next time.